Thank you very much, those of you who have come this evening. I think a topic on media suggests there are a lot of people getting their information from media. They don't need to come in person to a gathering to get information. But those of you who did come, I'm really pleased. I think we have a fascinating topic to explore this evening, and I hope that you'll feel comfortable to be active participants. Feel free to come on up closer to our panelists and speakers if you like. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Laurie, Norton Moffatt, the Director and CEO of Norman Rockwell Museum. The Four Freedoms Forums, and please come in. These are open to the public. You can drop in or not. You're very welcome. These are designed as town hall meetings inspired by Norman Rockwell's painting, Freedom of Speech, where we can come together and discuss topics of contemporary importance and relevance, offer our differing opinions, ask questions, offer our thoughts, and maybe learn a little bit more about some of the complex topics in our world today. Tonight we're here to talk about youth, identity, and media. Erik Erikson, the respected psychoanalyst, who incidentally was one of Norman Rockwell's own therapists here at Austin Riggs in Stockbridge, posited the pioneering and prevailing theory about identity and notes that childhood and adolescence are key periods in identity formation. Traditionally, throughout history, the family, church, or other civic belief systems, education, government, politics, were the most powerful forces that shaped identity. These were the sustained messages that children were reared with by these formal organizing systems in the world. Today, some people believe that media, which is omnipresent in our lives, and especially electronic and digital media, are wielding unremitting force on the shaping of young people's identities. Look this week at the cover of Rolling Stone's magazine. Did anybody see this? Either in person or in the news or on the internet? I had to get my hands on a physical copy of it. There was huge reaction across the nation to this image that many people found incendiary. The photograph itself was an unmanipulated, honest image, perhaps a school photograph. But its use by an influential media source, such as Rolling Stone magazine, gave it power that transcended the image. And some felt it glorified an individual who committed monstrous deeds, and others believed it called attention in an appropriate way to a vital and pressing problem that we face today. How are our young people's beliefs shaped? And what do we need to understand about growing up today so that we can avert future behavior such as carried out by this young man and his brother? Today, the far more powerful media source than a magazine cover, which is the media that Norman Rockwell's pictures were published on, it was the standard during his lifetime, is television and the internet, media forces which are omnipresent in most children's and people's lives, and I include adults in that as well. We're not talking only about children and media. It's estimated that young people today spend as much time mediating their lives through television and the internet as they do sleeping. And clearly, given the sheer amount of time and infinite number of sources that information is input into people today, it's a huge shaping force on young people's identities. I want to read some excerpts from an article, not to share an opinion of mine or the museum's, but to give you a little information about how a large media corporation is perhaps disseminating their information. This is about the Disney company, and it's an editorial. It's a scholar's opinion about how Disney is shaping youth. I've excerpted just fragments of it, which goes, under the tutelage of Disney and other mega corporations, children have become an audience captive not only to traditional forms of media such as film, television, and print, but even more so to the new digital media made readily accessible through mobile phones, PDAs, laptops, tablets, the internet, all kinds of devices to seek and receive information. This information, entertainment, and cultural pedagogy disseminated by massive multimedia corporations have become central in shaping and influencing every waking moment in children's daily lives. They believe this is aimed all toward a lifetime of constant, unthinking consumption. Consumer culture in the United States and increasingly across the globe does more than undermine the ideals of a secure and happy childhood. It exhibits the bad faith of a society in which, for children, there can only be one kind of value, a market value, one kind of success, profit, and one kind of existence, commodities, and one kind of social relationship, markets. So the thesis of this is that all of this entertainment sources is really aimed at producing consumers out of our children. I mentioned it's estimated that Americans spend more than 6 hours a day watching video-based entertainment, and the number of daily hours spent watching televisions, videos, and screens will, if it has not already, match the number of hours we spend sleeping. The American Medical Association reports that the combined hour spent in front of screens is the single biggest chunk of time in the waking life of an American child now. And they believe such statistics warrant grave concern given that the messages provided through such programming are largely shaped by a $263 billion a year United States advertising industry, which sells not only products, but values, images, and identities aimed largely at teaching young people to be consumers. There's a virtual army of marketers, psychologists, corporate executives that are engaged in what Susan Lin calls a hostile takeover of childhood, seeking in the new media economy to take advantage of the growing economic power wielded by children and teens. This is astonishing. They estimate that typically children see about 40,000 ads a year on TV, and by the time they enter 4th grade, they'll have memorized 300 to 400 brands. That's a kind of visual literacy. I won't go on longer with this, but to summarize, there's a belief that corporate culture is rewriting the nature of children's culture, a trend that becomes visible in the various ways traditional boundaries that were once maintained between the spheres of formal education and entertainment are now collapsed and intertwined. So we're not here today to place a value judgment, whether this is good or bad, too much or too little. You may have your own opinions, but the fact is, this is the world we live in today. And our goal tonight is to understand its impact on how we raise a child to be a thoughtful, contributing citizen, capable of critical, independent thinking and good judgment. What we perhaps don't know enough about is just how sophisticated global media juggernauts are and how scientifically they've gone about creating a culture of youthful identity framed by consumerism, homogeneity, and the consumer marketplace. So let me just remind us of the simple rules of our forum. They're very simple. They're designed to model civil discourse while exploring challenging ideas. After our thought leaders speak and offer their expertise and experience with the topic, we'll pass a microphone around, and we'd love to hear your questions and your thoughts, your opinions. We just ask that you identify yourself by name and state where you live, and keep your remarks or questions to about 2 minutes, and you'll have a chance to speak many times tonight since there are such an intimate group. And whether you agree or disagree with something that's said, we ask that we all demonstrate respectful listening so that we can go out in the world and model how to have a conversation about challenging topics and really model civil discourse. So I'd like to thank my colleague, Tom Daly, our Curator of Education at Norman Rockwell Museum, for bringing together our fine panel tonight, and he's going to introduce them, and then you'll hear from them. Thanks very much.
Well, you heard Laurie mention that I am an education curator, so I have to start out with a question. And thankfully you mentioned Erik Erikson earlier. And I'd just like to see if anybody has a sense of what the highest level of degree that Erikson had. Just a quick question. Yes?
Having been to rigs for conferences, he didn't have much structured education.
That's right. That's right. He had a high school diploma. He studied at various colleges, but never finished his degrees. So you might think, in hearing about Erik Erikson throughout our lives, as we all have, that he might have been a doctor, might have had a number of doctorates, But the way he was presented might have given us that impression. And he was certainly a talented psychotherapist, certainly had connections to everyone from the Freud School to Robert Cole, and had a number of institutes even named after him. So sometimes our perception can easily be swayed, and sometimes it's swayed slowly, and sometimes, as Laurie mentioned just a few moments ago, it can be swayed pretty quickly. So again, we're not here to tell you what the Norman Rockwell Museum thinks or what Tom Daly thinks about what's going on tonight. What we want to do is open a conversation. And we have three of the best people to help us open this conversation this evening. The first person I'll introduce is all the way over there to our right, and that's Jenn Smith. Most of you recognize her name from the Berkshire Eagle, and a few of you probably recognize her face from John Kroll's program in the morning. We see her during the week there. It's always fun to see what Jen's up to. And she's been an educator, obviously a journalist, and a person who's had education close to her heart, it seems, for most of her life. And I think she'll give us really a great opportunity to hear from her point of view, someone who's been in the classroom and now is behind the pen, if you will, what media's effect might have here. It's just really, really pretty wonderful. In the middle, we have Matthew Martin, who's the outreach coordinator for Mildred Elley and in Pittsfield, and he has the incredible opportunity to meet with young people all the time and talk to them about this thing called social media, that we all kind of wonder what that actually is. We easily will think Facebook or something like that, but I think Matthew will give us a slightly different take on what they're thinking about today. And then last and certainly not least, I was almost a little too familiar there and said Sue, but I'll say Dr. Birns. A distinguished scholar who has had the opportunity to connect with hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of students by this stage and influence them on how media can directly affect their lives, and hearing oftentimes in the classroom how media has affected these folks' lives. Luckily, she brings her students to us to talk to them about Norman Rockwell almost on a yearly basis, and we really feel very thrilled to have an opportunity to have a long-term relationship with MCLA in that way. So without further ado, I'm going to distribute a microphone, and who was lucky enough to draw the first card? All right. Professor.
As Tom said, I teach at MCLA. I'm actually, as of now, the chairperson of the Sociology department, although in fact I am a cultural anthropologist because we are a combined department. And I do get to bring my students down here at least once a year, my family's class, and the museum has developed a wonderful special gallery tour for us that talks about the depiction of 1950s stereotypical families in Rockwell's work as a reflection of the era in which, a part of the era, he was an illustrator for over a very long distinguished career. But so we look at particularly the middle of the 20th century and how it reflects what we thought was going on in families, as well as what was some of what was actually going on. The four freedoms themselves, one of the things, I'll give you the punchline first. I'm mostly going to talk about gender and kids and the media and how boys and girls have different experiences and how gender stereotypes are often taught to us. As Laurie mentioned, socialization happens in a lot of different spheres, and family is one of the most important places, school, peer groups, and the media. And the media has become increasingly important, I think, because, as she said, kids now spend so much of their times in front of one screen or another, plugged into some electronic device or another. And so when we come down here, we look at freedom from want and freedom from fear in particular. One is a family dinner table scene, and we get our traditional gender roles in terms of who obviously has done the cooking of that meal, who's clearly going to carve it up. And in freedom from fear, we see both parents tucking two kids into bed at night. It's clearly wartime. But again, dad is sort of dressed in a suit, pretty clearly looks like he's home from work. He's got the newspaper in his hands, which sets the timepiece in history. So the freedoms themselves reflect on gender roles. And I think that one of the most important things that we as a society and we as individuals who live and parent and care about kids need to do is to help them deconstruct some of those images that they're getting, because a lot of times they're not aware of it. One video, if you're interested, the Media Education Foundation out of Amherst does fabulous films on the subject of media literacy, and one of them that picks up on a lot of themes that Laurie mentioned is called Consuming Kids. And in that video, they give sort of some really shocking statistics about kids as consumers and how they are very directly targeted. It's no accident. It's a $40 billion that kids themselves spend in this country every year. And so large corporations have an interest in tapping into that market, but they also exercise control and input into how another $700 billion is spent. And it sort of blew my mind when I heard that that was more than the gross economy of 115, if you take the 115 world's poorest countries, and there's something like close to 200 recognized sovereign nations. If you take the economies of the poorer half, that's less than that $700 billion. So American kids are incredible consumers, and it's being targeted to them. According to the Media Education Foundation, the average child receives over 3,000 commercial messages a day. And that's not just what they're getting from the internet, from television. It's in their schools now because of the partnerships between public education and corporations to help sort of keep the revenue stream in schools. There are big banners that promote particular brands right in their schools, as well as the vending machines that are all over the place. So it's not just what they're getting in targeted ads. It's very widespread. So we have to be concerned, I think, as adults with what those messages are. And some of them are great. I think personally as an educator, the access that I have to information that comes from living in the digital age is phenomenal. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource. But I know the difference. One of the things that my students find challenging is sometimes when they log on to the internet, they don't know the difference between Fred's website and what Fred's thinking today and the Smithsonian. So they'll take what appears in either place and give it equal weight. And so part of the media literacy is taking care of that as well. But the magazines, the sales catalogs that come into our homes represent, a form of media. They're sending messages. I remember my daughter as a 12-year-old looking at a Delia's catalog, which was, I don't even know if Delia's is still around, but it was targeted towards clothing for young adolescent girls, and looking at it and saying, there isn't a kid in here who's bigger than a size 2, which was probably true at that time. And so we're sending a message. This is what little girls, young girls should look like. And in fact, in this country right now, I want to be sure I get the number right, by the time they're in 4th grade, where is it? 80% of 4th grade girls think they're too fat and are on diets. So one of the messages they're getting, and this is a gendered message, it's targeted to little girls. Little boys don't have eating disorders at the same rate, not close to that of little girls. They already have been told by many different sources of information that their bodies are defective, that they don't look the way they should, and that they can and should control this, and they're internalizing those messages. Close to 10 million American women have cosmetic surgery annually in this country, and 90% of strictly cosmetic surgeries are performed on women as opposed to men. So clearly, again, some of these messages are very, very gendered. They come through TV, video, internet, music videos, ads. One of the things that I think is particularly dangerous, and this I'm sure has the potential to be a very hot topic for conversation, is pornography. Pornography this is somewhat outside of my real area expertise, but it has gotten progressively more and more violent in recent decades and is very closely tied, not all porn, but a lot of it, to violence against women. And yet, 3 out of 4 college men view porn every year, almost half of them every week, and pornography is the single most common screensaver on college-age men's computers. So again, porn in and of itself, we don't need to get hysterical over that, but violent pornography that promotes the degradation of women, I think that we do need to worry about that. Okay. So again, I don't think the media in and of itself is good or bad. I think it's good and bad, and I think that what our biggest responsibility is to kids, because it has a huge impact on them, is to help them deconstruct what it is that they're seeing and call their attention to some stuff that they're exposed to that they're not even conscious that they are being exposed to. And I think we can do that societally, and we can also do that on the individual basis, and that's my food for thought.
Well, we're fortunate, again, to have a voice of a person who is connected with young people on a regular basis, and Matthew Martin will talk a little bit about the social media and also find out, well, secondhand, I guess, since you're going to be telling us the story, what some young people are thinking about the media that they're viewing. So if I might come up to the microphone, that would be great.
I think this will be a really good transition from what Sue was talking about, because she was talking a lot about what are we receiving. So what are the youth receiving right now in terms of media? What a lot of I talk about and what I preach is what are we putting out there? What are the youth putting out there? And I'll say we kind of casually because I don't identify anymore as that age, but a lot of what they're doing now is incredibly dangerous. And when I talk about youth, I talk about anybody that has access to a computer, anybody who can sign up to get on Facebook, anybody who can sign up to get on Twitter, anybody who can send an email, which is starting now at a very, very young age. When I was a kid, it took me, I think, until about 15, 16 years old to get a cell phone, and I couldn't get onto the internet until I was probably 13 or 14 years old. That's starting to get significantly younger now. My sister, I think, was well on 7, 8 years old. So it's something that we're seeing consistently younger. And you know, what I do is I speak to a lot of the local high schools in Berkshire County. We talk to a lot of the career classes. And what we're focusing on is how does social media, in particular, impact your ability to, 1, get into college, 2, get a career, you know, move on. A lot of what we focus on at the school is career training, relevant career training. So I'm in the classrooms almost monthly talking about this, saying, okay, you know, if you're serious about wanting to become you know, a medical assistant someday, if you're serious about working in the early childhood education field, these are the things that you need to worry about. You need to worry about how you're portraying yourself on social media. You need to worry about what you're doing on social media. What groups are you liking? Who are you associating with? What exactly are you doing? One of the examples that you might have read that had come up in the Eagle was a student that was attending a community college, and he had thought that that school was selling his personal information, which many schools do. They absolutely do that. They sell that to credit card companies. And he believed he was unfairly being marketed. He was getting spam in his inbox daily. And what had happened was he went on Facebook and, like every young person does, blast the employer, blast the school, right? And he blasted the school. And the school took aim at that, and they suspended him. And what I try to talk to students about is when you're suspended from a college or an institution, you lose your financial aid. You lose your scholarship availability. And in talking with the Eagle reporter about that, we were digging further, and he was able to come back to the institution, but the damage is already done. You know, now when an employer goes to Google this gentleman's name when he gets out of college, what are going to be the first 200 hits? This story. And if I'm an employer and I'm getting 150 applications a job, I'm not going to want to deal with it. And a lot of this, you know, cross into, you know, fairness and, it's my own personal thing, and I don't think I should be judged based on what I'm putting out there. But what I talk to students about is that all information is public. Anything that you put out there on social media is public, and it can be used against you. It's going to be used against you potentially not to get a job interview. Maybe you don't get a job. Maybe you lose your job, and there's countless examples of people that have lost their jobs based on what they post on social media. In admissions, I think the latest number is that 82% of admissions officials now use social media to help determine whether they're going to accept a student to school or not. So that kind of goes, that really puts it out there that, look, admissions departments of colleges are looking at this. We use it at the school. If we hear that, there's an issue with a particular student that's applied to the school, we'll absolutely further look into it. We'll Google, we'll Facebook, we'll see what we can get under, because we want strong representatives of the school when they get out there in the community. And employers are the same way. It's a big commitment now for employers to take on employees. Gone are the days of you putting in your 9 to 5 and leaving. That you always represent your employer now, and part of what you do on social media is a representation of your employer. And so what we try to talk to the students about, and what I try to talk to the high school students about a lot of times is, look, the stuff that you're doing on there now may seem funny. The stuff that you're putting up on Friday, Saturday nights may seem funny, but it's absolutely going to come back to bite you further down the road when it comes to looking to land a job or get into school or get into graduate school. And that's one of the biggest pressing issues I see right now with youth and media. Before it was always, who's got the strongest SAT scores, who's got the strongest college applications, essays. No, this is absolutely one of the first and foremost things that schools are looking at and employers are looking at. So that's what we really try to talk to the youth about, and it's definitely a driving factor when it comes to employment. And so a lot of what we focus on at the school is getting our students employed out in the field, and if this is something that's going to prevent them from doing it, we try to address it. So.
And that might have been one aspect that we didn't even stop to think about. Some of us might be in a situation where we remember that media only seemed to go in one direction. It just came at us, and now media is going in a lot of different directions. And I think that was an excellent point. Excellent point. Many excellent points, actually. So our next thought leader is Jenn Smith, and as I mentioned before, some of you recognize her name, and even a few of you, I'm sure, recognize her face. A reporter who's been an integral part of our community and has really brought to light a number of different subjects that have been very important to education, and has been here for a few times to cover a couple of our events, which is really great. So I'd like to ask Jenn if she wouldn't mind to come up and just talk a little bit about, I'm not going to ask you to represent all of media, that would be unfair, but I will say that I noticed that Jenn was using her iPhone for a good portion of the time when we were up here talking. I just thought that was kind of interesting. I'm just going to say that. So, taking some pictures, sure.
I exactly live in a 24-hour, 24/7 news cycle. We are online, and I'm not a Luddite in my generation. I'm 31 years old, but I was dragging my heels on social media. I did not want to be on Twitter. I thought the vernacular of following people was ridiculous, but I got sucked in. I actually have this iPhone with me now, which is from work, and I have a Droid in my pocket. So that's my evolution. But I think my interest in being here tonight is to kind of offer another perspective of how we think of the word media, how we consume the idea of media, and I think what Sue said, it's both can be both good and bad. I think what the factoid that Tom brought up about Erik Erikson, not everything you see is what it is. Not everything. The way things look, the way things are initially presented may not be the full story. And I think, if I had my way, if I were the czar of education or I guess civics in the US and anywhere, I would, really advocate for media literacy and just general awareness so that people aren't scared to use it. You're not scaring young people, kids, to live their lives, to celebrate and exercise free expression, as Rockwell's paintings kind of highlighted. We have the right to do what we ever want to do, but to make decisions responsibly, and to also know that because there is so much media out there, we are accountable for everything we do and say, because it's so well documented. And So I guess this is the audience interaction portion of the thing, but just to kind of help illustrate and facilitate some thoughts and ideas, I'm just going to name names like they were brands, and I just want to see a show of hands if you've heard of these names. So how many of you have heard of Trayvon Martin? Hands. Okay. How many have heard of Malala Yousafzai? Few less. How many of you have heard of the 20-something Tsarnaev brothers? 20-somethings. They're both 20-somethings. Dzhokhar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev. Yes. How many of you, just out of curiosity, are from Berkshire County in here? Some of you? Oh, great. So we have some other people. So you may not recognize these names, and that's okay. But if you're from Berkshire County, how many of you know the name Shelby Sebring? No one. Okay. And how of you know the name Corey Alston? No one. So the first couple names that I had mentioned, obviously Trayvon Martin made big headline news as a figure, unfortunately, who fatally was involved in an incident in Florida, who was shot and killed by George Zimmerman. We all know the trial. I don't think, because I saw the show of hands, I don't think I need to go into big detail. The Tsarnaev brothers were the two young men kind of held accountable for what happened at the Boston Marathon and the bombings there. Also young men of college age. Malala Yousafzai is a young girl from Pakistan who was shot but survived for pursuing her education, and actually recently spoke here in the U.S. at the UN to tell her story. Before I get into the two other names that I mentioned, I bring these names up to run them through your memory because sometimes as consumers we gravitate towards the negative or the dramatic news, news that has these kind of story arcs that we grew up with. You know, even if you read superhero comics or you had a fable that you loved, there was always some dramatic and sort of air of tragedy about it. And we're attracted to these stories, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a good story. But these are also the things that stick with us, and that even though it might be out there in the media, like Malala's story is very out there in the media, but we just might not consume it because maybe it just doesn't hold as much meaning or just doesn't grab our attention as much. The two local names I mentioned, Shelby Sebring was a young girl was at Pittsfield High School, then was homeschooled, worked as an intern last year at the Bidwell House Museum in Monterey. She actually cracked a code that a minister used to write in these symbols, and as part of her assignment, just cracked this code and was able to unlock this whole cache of history that no one ever really fully understood. This is a girl who I wrote about who was in our own backyard. The story actually got picked up by the Boston Globe, surprisingly, even to me, but these are some of the amazing stories. Corey Alston is a young man I wrote about recently, who is from both South County, the Housatonic area, and also did some work in Pittsfield on something called the Voice Identity Project, which was recently presented at the Berkshire Museum. He also took his project over to South Africa, where he was working with children in AIDS and HIV orphanages. And Corey is, he'll be a high school senior. I just wanted to read an excerpt because we don't have any youth panelists. I'm 31, I don't know how you old guys are, but how old you guys are, but I figured I'd probably like to bring some words of a young person here. And he said, quote, "At my age, however, I sometimes feel so much that people aren't listening to me. Also, some people at my age just don't know how to share what they have to say." And the ultimate kind of concept of his Voice Identity Project is the idea that everyone has a story and every story deserves to be shared. And I think as consumers, you know, I always hear, people always complain to me all the time that there's no such thing as good news. And I know that's a lie because there is a lot of good news. There is a lot of young people who are expressing themselves and if given a chance can have forums for good ideas to actually change and shift the way things are. There's, in Berkshire County, there's something I've covered called the 411 and the 413 conference. 411 means kind of information. 413 is the area code here, so that's how it comes together in that title. But they've actually had panel discussions that were curated by themselves with their concerns of issues that Matthew brought up about how you could have a really ugly thumbnail or footprint tacked onto your social media history. And if you're a grandparent or if you're a parent or a student yourself who is posting your stuff, I mean, my friends who have kids, their kids now have a social media footprint, whether you like it or not, because their photos are getting posted every 2 seconds with every bite they take and every first step they have. It's all documented on Facebook now. So that's why I guess I'm here to kind of advocate towards this greater awareness and to kind of we as consumers to accept this kind of reality that it's out there and what we can do as consumers and as people engaged in dialogue to actually address this with some social responsibility and just thoughtfulness. So thank you all again for being here tonight.
So thank you very much. A wide range of perspectives, and I think a really important point that the media works in all directions now, and we have the same power to be publishers and creators as the corporate conglomerate media does as well, and learning how to be smart about that and how to use it effectively is certainly a skill that I think our young people need to know today. So we have 2 microphones, and we'd love to pass these around and invite anyone who would like to make a comment or has a question for our panelists to join in the program now.
Hi there. My name is Nat, and I work for the museum here, but I live in Canaan, New York, right next to West Stockbridge. But I had a question about a New York Times article that I saw 2 days ago about Cuba and a recent speech that was given there by the president saying that he was very concerned about lack of civility, especially among the young people in Cuba, and lamenting the fact that even after years of literacy programs and things that they've tried to put in place to really create what, Jen, I think you were talking about, the shared stories and shared perspectives, that they just don't see a widespread understanding of what it is to be part of a civil society. And seems to be, I don't know much about Cuba, I don't know much about the consumerist culture in Cuba. I imagine it's not at the same level as the United States, but it does seem like there is some kind of lesson there that it's not just about, you know, the availability of media, but how things are being shared and how stories are being, and how people feel enfranchised, I guess. And if they don't feel that way, then there's this kind of reaction. So I would just like, I guess, all 3 panelists to somewhat respond to that, if you've seen the article or anything. So.
I did not see the article. I think that as adults, we model a lot of bad behavior for kids in terms of civility and incivility, from road rage to how we talk to the people that are in front of us in the supermarket. And I think we could certainly clean up our own act. When I was listening to you talk, 2 sort of media images came to my mind immediately. One was sort of negative and one was positive. The negative one was the whole bullying issue and how the social media has allowed bullying of children to go from what used to be, you know, when I was a kid, like, and I don't even know if it was really bullying because he lived a block over and kind of had a crush on me, but, you know, the kid used to follow me home from school and throw packed ice balls down my rubber boots. And that was like bullying. That was, you know, that was the form that it took. Or there was, I can think of a less kind version. There was some kid on the playground who was, you know, traumatized because he had an unfortunate last name. But kids, certainly we didn't know about it, and I'm sure it didn't happen the same way, weren't killing themselves because they were being publicly shamed. It's sort of the mass part of mass media that sort of feeds into it. That's a negative piece. On the positive side, I don't know how many of you saw it, but I was watching TV. I'm an anthropologist, right? I'm sort of looking at culture all the time. I'm watching TV one night, and all of a sudden I say, whoa, that is a Cheerios commercial with an interracial couple, and it's just there, and it's pathetic that it stands out to me, but it does stand out to me because I haven't ever seen one of those before. And the commercial itself wasn't the fabulous, I mean, I was pleased to see sort of some family diversity reflected in a commercial because it's not often. But on YouTube the other day, somebody posted on Facebook a YouTube piece that was 7 or 8 minutes long that was interviews with kids about that commercial. So they showed the commercial to a group of kids, some of whom looked like they weren't much older than 5 or 6, maybe to adolescents, and then they asked them, like, what was unusual about that commercial. And they talked about the kid putting the Cheerios on her father's heart. They talked about, they didn't really understand the question, and they had to keep probing. The race was like a non-issue for these kids. And the kids were, you know, a cross-section of our racial population in the country. And none of them, the interracial nature of the family was like not even something they saw. It was, so they just sort of, you know, talked about the ridiculousness of the kid putting Cheerios on her father's heart, because that was the real point of the commercial, was that the Cheerios are heart healthy. So, so it doesn't really answer your question, but I think that that we can use, that it can be used to promote civility and harmony, and it can be used to promote hate. And, you know, it's just like it's a cloud and a silver lining, and they're both there. And I don't know the magic of like promoting one and without promoting the other. When you figure it out, please let me know, because I don't know.
Yeah, I think like Sue said, the positive and the negative things there's definitely opportunity for both, especially when it comes to social media. I think when we're talking about the youth, unfortunately, it has a lot to do with the negativity when it comes to that side of things. And I'll expand a little bit on the bullying thing. If you're from this area, if you're from Berkshire County, you're probably familiar with the Phoebe Prince story, which was a young girl who had committed suicide out in Hadley, who was consistently cyberbullied. And a little bit about what I talked about earlier when when I say this stuff's going to follow you the rest of your life. Those girls that were involved with that cyberbullying, this is on them for the rest of their lives. They are probably going to have a real hard time getting into school. They're going to have a real hard time holding down a job because of this. And it's such a tough age, to not be able to differentiate between, the impact that you're going to have on someone. Like Sue mentioned, even when I was younger, you talk about bullying, it was always, one-on-one or two, it was a small group setting. Now when students are in middle school and high school and they're telling me, oh, I have 800 friends on Facebook, and they're commenting, liking, sharing, all of this media and this negativity about one person, has a huge psychological impact on, whether a student's going to go to school the next day, how are they going to succeed.